Approximately a dozen FBI employees who worked on President Trump's classified documents investigation have been fired, according to multiple sources. The firings followed a report from Reuters that said the Bureau subpoenaed records of phone calls made by FBI Director Kash Patel and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles when they were still both private citizens as part of the special counsel's probe. Director Patel did not provide any evidence of wrongdoing by those who were terminated. Joining us now is CBS News Senior Justice Department reporter Sarah Lynch. Sarah, thanks.
Now, though, pause that conversation to get back to this breaking news we just teased. Just moments ago, the House Oversight Committee released never-before-seen emails from Jeffrey Epstein's estate, which include correspondence between Epstein and his longtime.
Now that report is quickly fueling a new wave of questions surrounding the Epstein investigation, because alongside those emails, new whistleblower claims are beginning to surface. According to people familiar with the situation, redacted files connected to the federal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein were recently leaked to members of Congress and journalists. These files come from what was one of the largest criminal investigations in modern federal history, an investigation that produced millions of pages of evidence, interviews, and case records. But whistleblowers say something unusual appears inside that massive database. They claim dozens of FBI interview summaries are now missing. Those summaries are known as 302 forms, the official documents FBI agents create after conducting interviews with witnesses or victims. Every time agents speak with someone connected to a case, a 302 form is written to record what was said. Those records become permanent parts of the investigative file, which is why the current claim is drawing so much attention, because according to the whistleblowers, more than 40 of these forms cannot currently be located inside the Epstein investigation files. That is not a minor discrepancy. For investigators, missing documentation inside a federal database raises immediate questions. Was something deleted? Was something moved? Or was something removed intentionally? Before diving deeper into the claims, it helps to understand why the Epstein investigation continues to attract so much attention years later. So let's quickly revisit the background of the case itself.
Good morning, Jonathan. Well, look, the Epstein estate has released some 23,000 emails, and House Democrats have been poring over them, and they found some correspondence directly mentioning Donald Trump by name. They've released 3 of these emails, and they're quite interesting. The first one was between Ghislaine Maxwell, and then in a separate email years later with author Michael Wolff in 2019, Epstein said explicitly that Donald Trump, quote, knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. And then the Democrats cite another email.
The Epstein case remains one of the most controversial investigations of the past several decades. Authorities said Epstein operated a large trafficking network that exploited young women and girls. Investigators examined properties connected to Epstein in New York, Florida, and the Caribbean, along with flights taken on his private jet. As the investigation expanded, attention also turned toward individuals who moved in the same social circles. Among the names that appeared in various reports over the years was Donald Trump, who had been photographed with Epstein at social events during the 1980s and 1990s. At the time, both men were part of the same high-profile social environment surrounding New York real estate and nightlife. Because of that connection, journalists and investigators have revisited their relationship many times over the years. Now, the whistleblower claims about missing FBI records are bringing that issue back into focus once again. According to individuals familiar with the leaked material, one of the interview summaries that cannot currently be located allegedly involved a survivor connected to Epstein's trafficking operation. That interview reportedly contained accusations referencing Mar-a-Lago, Trump's private club in Palm Beach, Florida. To be clear, these claims are part of the whistleblower allegations, and investigators would need access to the original files to confirm exactly what the interview contained. But the key issue being raised right now is the absence of the document itself. If the interview occurred, there should be an official 302 form describing it, and according to the whistleblowers, that record is no longer present inside the case database. That leads to the central question now circulating among lawmakers. If these documents existed at one time, who removed them and when? because federal investigative records normally remain preserved indefinitely. Interview summaries, especially those connected to a major trafficking investigation, are not supposed to disappear. Every file is logged and archived for potential use by prosecutors, courts, and congressional investigators. So if dozens of summaries truly went missing, someone would likely have needed direct access to the system to alter the records. That possibility is already prompting calls for further review. Some lawmakers are now suggesting Congress may request access to the database itself to determine whether the whistleblower claims are accurate. Others say investigators should interview agents who originally worked on the Epstein case. The goal would be simple: confirm whether the records were ever logged into the system and determine whether they were later removed. Additional script. After clip 2. Another major issue investigators will likely examine is when these documents may have disappeared. The timeline could be extremely important. If the files were removed years ago, that would suggest the issue began long before the current political moment. But if the records disappeared more recently, that would raise very different questions about access to the database and who had the authority to make changes. Federal case management systems typically track edits and changes, meaning investigators could potentially trace when a file was altered or removed. Those digital records may become critical if Congress or federal watchdogs decide to launch a deeper inquiry. And there is another reason this issue is attracting so much attention. The Epstein investigation has long been surrounded by public skepticism and unanswered questions. For years, critics argued that powerful individuals connected to Epstein may have avoided scrutiny. That perception has fueled intense public interest whenever new documents or testimony emerges. Every time a new record appears, or when a previously unknown detail surfaces, it tends to reopen the same debate. Did investigators uncover everything they were supposed to, or were certain aspects of the case never fully explored? The whistleblower claims about missing interview summaries are now feeding directly into those concerns, because if official witness interviews were removed from the case file, it could potentially mean that important testimony is no longer easily accessible. And that is exactly why some lawmakers are already calling for greater transparency. Several members of Congress have previously pushed for broader release of Epstein-related documents. Their argument is that survivors and the public deserve to know the full scope of what investigators uncovered. Others warn that releasing sensitive investigative materials must be handled carefully, especially when those records include personal information from victims. Balancing those concerns is likely to be one of the biggest challenges moving forward. Transparency on one side, privacy and due process on the other. Meanwhile, legal experts say determining whether anything improper occurred will require careful verification of the whistleblower claims. Investigators would first need to confirm that the missing documents actually existed in the database. Next, they would need to determine whether the records were intentionally removed, misfiled, or possibly still stored elsewhere within the massive archive. Remember, the Epstein investigation reportedly produced millions of pages of material. Sorting through that volume of documentation is not a quick process. But if even a small portion of those records were intentionally removed, that discovery could trigger a much broader investigation. Federal oversight bodies, inspector generals, or congressional committees could all potentially become involved. For now, however, much of the conversation is still based on early reports and whistleblower claims. No official confirmation has yet been announced regarding the missing files, and that means investigators will likely proceed cautiously as they attempt to verify the information. What is certain is that the Epstein case continues to generate headlines years after the original criminal proceedings. Few investigations have left such a lasting impact on public debate. Part of that is due to the scale of the allegations. Part of it is due to the high-profile figures who were connected socially or professionally to Epstein over the years. And part of it is because many people still believe that the full story has never completely come to light. As a result, every new development, whether it involves emails, witness testimony, or internal records, immediately draws intense attention. The whistleblower claims about the missing FBI interview summaries are the latest example. And depending on what investigators ultimately find, This story could either fade away as a misunderstanding within a massive database, or it could lead to a much larger review of how evidence from the Epstein investigation has been preserved. For now, lawmakers, journalists, and investigators are all watching closely. Because if additional documents surface, or if the missing records are eventually located, those findings could reshape how this entire chapter of the investigation is understood. And until those questions are answered, the debate surrounding the Epstein files is likely to continue.